Good evening, and thank you for being here. This is Joey Buckholz, the Utopian Baseball Universe. We've got 3 shows left, a special show tonight. We're looking at the San Francisco Giants, and tonight's going to be a really fun show. We've got for a guest Eric C. Gray. I just finished his book about an hour ago, and it is fantastic. He's going to tell you about it, how it came about. He's going to read some selections from it tonight. I don't want to waste any more time. You guys are tired of seeing me for a month. This is show 30, number 30 in 31 days. But this is really special because I've been waiting for this one for about a month. So let's bring him on. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Eric C. Gray is the author of Bases to Bleachers, a collection of personal baseball stories from the stands and beyond. And like I've said, I just finished it today. Why don't you tell the viewers how it came about, maybe a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into it.
Thank you, Joey. Thank you for your great enthusiasm about my book. I really appreciate it, and I have to give a shout out to our mutual friend Rick Linneberg, who put me in touch with you in the first place. So, Rick, if you're there, thank you yet again.
Rick sure is here. He reached out to me and said, "I got to see this show tonight."
Great. He's a great friend. Thank you. Tell you about myself is I'm a native New Yorker, but I've lived in San Francisco now for 46 years, and my baseball trail, I started as a Yankee fan because when you're in New York and you're 5 years old and that's the only team that's there and you have Mickey Mantle, what more could you possibly need? But I'm from Long Island, so I became a Mets fan. And then I moved to San Francisco, and I still love the Mets, but they're just a shade behind the Giants because my family has pretty much shamed me into becoming a Giants fan. So that's what I am. It was in August of 2011 when I was at a game with my wife, Lynn, our daughter, Rachel, and our friend, Cheryl. And as you know, I mean, one of the things that I say in the introduction of my book is people like baseball or they don't because of the pace. I love the pace where you can sit, look at the field, think, talk to the people you're with. And I was doing just that. And I just kind of idly said to them, what's your favorite game that you've ever been to? Or what's your favorite moment at a game? And I wasn't all that specific. And they gave me their answer. And for Giants fans, Lynn and Cheryl both gave the answer of it was the last game of the 2010 season when the Giants finally beat the Padres after trying 3 times, trying really hard to force themselves out of the playoffs. And it was really, it was playoff pitch baseball. So I went home and I sent an email to a bunch of people. What's your favorite game? I didn't have a book in mind. It was just kind of curious what their favorite game was. And I included on this list my friend Andy Berger, who likes baseball less than anybody I know. But I included him on this list because that's what we do to each other. We just bust each other's chops. And he sent me a story that was a memory that was so personal and so moving that I immediately knew what I had to do. Even at that point, though, I don't think I recognized that the book would become really much less about baseball than it would be a human interest book. Anyway, I started contacting more people. I asked people that I was emailing if they could ask their friends. And then I expanded this universe. And then I kind of went on a mission, which is that if you were anywhere, if you were in the airport, in the train station, in a restaurant, in a movie theater, walking down the street, at spring training, it didn't matter where you are, if you had on a baseball jersey or a baseball hat, I was coming to you and telling you about this book and asking if you had a story. And then at some point I decided, because I'm from New York and because I live here now, and my wife is from Chicago and we have family in Boston, these are the places where I was getting the vast majority of the stories. And I really wanted to make it far broader than that. So I joined a couple of Facebook groups about baseball. And that's when it really took off. The stories just came pouring in. And by the time I finally said enough's enough, the more stories I get, because I just kept getting greedy, right? I mean, I could have had the book done 4 years ago instead of 2. I just kept getting greedy. And the more stories I had, the more complicated my task was going to be. At that point, I had 1,250 stories from people all over the country. In fact, there are stories of or from or about 14 different countries. So here I am with 1,250 stories, knowing darn well that this is way too long for anything resembling a reasonably sized book. And that became I would say if I were like a normal non-neurotic person, it became the fun part of it. But because I am neurotic, it became the really difficult, challenging part, which is which stories was I going to use. And I frequently say that if I had taken 1,250 pieces of paper and thrown them up in the air and put on a blindfold and just chosen 275, I would have had a really good book. But obviously that's not the way I did it. As stories came in, what we say in California, right? I'm loath to say this, but I will, is it really did happen organically, because stories, at some point, it just became clear what the chapters were going to be. It became very clear that there would be a chapter on family in baseball. There had to be. It became clear there would be a chapter on Mickey, can I have your autograph? There are just all these stories, all these chapters that here, and the one that is probably most important to me is a chapter which is called "What Baseball Means to Me." It's given me some stories that are frankly astonishing. What baseball has meant to these people. I've got a chapter on the Negro Leagues. I was lucky enough to interview a couple of Negro Leaguers, but all the other stories in the chapter are in some way related to a Negro League player. There's a chapter on women in baseball, and not to denigrate my many, many wonderful softball partner friends that are women. This is a chapter that, for the most part, is more about women playing or involved in baseball at a much more professional level. There's a chapter on international baseball. There's a chapter on not quite the major leagues, stories of things that were not major league level. They were either little league or they were high school or college. These are some of the chapters in it, and it became, frankly, a real delight to do this. And by the time I was done, I think there were 23 chapters and about 275 stories. And they're amazing. So, when I brag about this book, and I do, it isn't about, look how great I am. It's about how lucky I was to be able to get all these incredible stories. To give some examples, and I'll read some stories later, but I'm not going to read the longer ones. And I don't mean that the longer ones are better than the short ones, but there are some great longer stories, and I just really won't have time to do that. I have a story from a woman named Rosie Kakura, and Rosie is Japanese American, and she was interned in the prison, in the internment camps during World War II. She's Japanese American, and it's about her playing baseball. I mean, that is just, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about that story. There's a story. Everybody knows the movie A League of Their Own. Well, I have a story told to me directly from a woman who played in the league that the League of Their Own was based on. Something I should be very clear about is every one of these stories was given directly to me. I wasn't taking things off the internet that anybody could find. That's not what I wanted to do. These were stories that were given to me directly, or in a couple of cases, more so in the next book, like friends, people who had their father told them a story. That's going to go in a chapter called Stories Handed Down. So that's the way the book was constructed. There were just too many great stories that I couldn't fit into the first one. And the publisher agreed right from the beginning that there would be a second book. I want to be clear that stories that were saved for the second book, it's not because they weren't good enough. I always ask people, have you ever seen the movie Ghostbusters? And everybody says, yes, of course, what a great movie it was. Well, has anybody seen Ghostbusters 2? you know, like maybe the worst movie of all time. And it's because expectations were high. And I just did not want to have a second book that wasn't any good or wasn't as good. So many stories, many, in fact, entire chapters were held back for a book two. And again, not because they weren't good enough, because they would have been. I never use this expression, but a number of people wrote me and said, well, I don't know if this is book worthy. I mean, that's almost insulting. So I would never have used that. But I would say that of the using that language that people have expressed, 2/3 of the 1,250 stories I got were what I would call book worthy. And of course, I've gotten new ones since. And that's kind of the, as they say, the journey of this book. It was amazing. I met some incredible people. I've made good friends through this book, which is something that I frankly wasn't ever anticipating. And that's kind of how this book came about, and that's what it is. Would you like me to read some stories?
I would love that.
Any questions that you wanted to ask before I do that?
Not at this time. I'm sure that they're going to come up. Actually, at the end of the show, any of the comments or questions that come our way, we're going to share at the end so that we can save those for one section.
Great. Okay, so I always read this, unless it's a reading with people, been there many times. I always read this story, and there's a really important reason I do, but let me first read it. I spent my entire career working with Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Labor, and I oversaw Job Corps programs, which are job training programs for disadvantaged youth. And I made an acquaintance with a woman when I was leading a work group, and she and I became good friends. I kind of mentored her. And when we were in Minneapolis visiting my wife's family, we got together with Clara, and she said, Eric, I don't really have any stories. I'm not a big baseball fan, but send me your book description. Sorry, I'm kind of look a little disheveled here. I have no idea what's going on. It's all backwards, right? You get a chance to see my collarbone. So anyway, she said, I don't have any stories. I'm not a big baseball fan, but send me your book description. I have a lot of friends who are. You'll get great stories. Well, I never got anything from any of her friends, but I got this from Sarah the very next day. I'm not a fan of any sports. I've been to a few baseball games, but only when I'd get free tickets and go for the experience of drinking beer, eating stadium food, and just having a good time with friends. It's not that I don't like baseball. I just don't know much about the game, who the players are, or many of the rules. I was in Chicago for a Job Corps conference and meeting my friend Pearl in the bar of the hotel where I was staying. When I got to the bar in the late afternoon, there were just a few people there, but not Pearl. An older gentleman was sitting alone at the bar, and I felt it would be safe sitting next to him, as I preferred not to sit alone. I asked if I could join him while waiting for my friend. We had a few drinks, chatted about life, my job, the fact that I liked working with young adults, and that I was excited to see my friend, who I hadn't seen in quite a while. He shared little about himself. I was just glad that I felt comfortable with him and that we could sit there together. Once Pearl showed up, I turned to the man and said, it was nice to meet him, although we didn't know each other's names. I introduced myself, and he said, nice to meet you, Sarah. My name is Ernie Banks. We shook hands, and I went to sit with my friend. My friend, a native Chicagoan, asked me who I was talking to, and when I told her, she started to shake a little bit and asked if I knew who Ernie Banks was. I said, well, yes, it's the man over there at the bar. That's Ernie Banks? Mr. Cub. You must go ask him for his autograph. He's the most famous Cub player ever. She replied excitedly. I wandered back over and said, Mr. Banks, my friend over there tells me I need to get your autograph. You're Mr. Cub? You must have been one great basketball player. Well, that sure made him laugh, and he said it was great to be in Chicago having a casual conversation with someone who had no idea who he was. And by the way, he played baseball with the Cubs, not basketball. He gave me an autograph and wished me luck. We had a good conversation, a few laughs, and fun moments, two strangers keeping each other company on a slow afternoon in a bar. How many people can stay the same? And she ends her story by saying, I still have that autograph somewhere. He even wrote, good luck with Job Corps. And It didn't get to me in time to make it into this book, but Sarah did find the autograph, and she still has it. Now, the reason that story is so important to me is when I got the story, the first thing I said, and frankly, who wouldn't, is, "Oh my God, what a great story this is." And the second thing I said was, "But there's no place for it in this book." And the third thing I said was, "I have to make a place for it in this book." And that's the story that basically made me completely rethink the structure of this book, how it was going to come about. And I knew at that point that I needed the content. No, I needed the structure of the book to fit my content, not my content fitting the structure. And previously, I would have said, well, it didn't take place at a baseball game. It doesn't belong in the book. And it most certainly does. So that's the story from my friend Sarah. And it's a great story. The next story is from a friend. As I was telling you earlier, Joey, my wife and I do take trips between Minneapolis and Chicago, where her family are. And we stopped in Milwaukee overnight to see a game. And I started to talk to the guys behind me. And this is the story. This is his story. And Dean, if you're on here, I know you both love it, can't stand the story anymore. But remember, man, you gave it to me, and you really do love it. So here it is. I'm a lifelong Milwaukee baseball fan. First the Braves, and now the Brewers. I took my family to a Tigers-Brewers game when Sparky Anderson managed the Tigers. Brewers players included Robin Yount and Michael Young. And I'm saying that really carefully because this comes into play, as you know, Joey. Our kids, Faye and Mark, were young. Mark, now an avid baseball fan as well, was 4 or 5. At that time, I was the only fan in the family and essentially dragged them on a family outing, hoping for a great time that we would repeat. Like any young kid not into the game, Mark was very fussy, soothed only by the next food treat. He loved the red licorice ropes, so I bought him one every time he whined about going home. The game hit a dreadfully long intermission when Sparky, the umpires, and the Brewers manager, Tom Troublehorn, conferred for the longest time with fans not having the faintest idea about the matter. Mark got fussier and wanted to go, a sentiment with which my wife, Debbie, agreed. However, I had never left a ball game before it was over, regardless of the score, including this one, in which the Tigers had a seemingly insurmountable lead in the early innings. We later learned Sparky was objecting to an error on the lineup card that Troublehorn submitted, listing either Young or Yount twice rather than correctly identifying each of them. Mark grew more insistent about leaving, progressing from whining to coughing. Debbie became more insistent it was time to go. I was even more adamant that we stay until the end. By then, Mark had agitated himself to the point where he vomited the day's treats onto the woman next to him. Someone across the aisle said he was getting the paramedics on duty because he appeared to be vomiting blood, but I explained that it was only the red licorice. We had no choice but to go. Tail between my legs, really upset about leaving, even under those circumstances. Of course, as soon as we left, Mark calmed down, acting like the happiest guy in the world. I was fuming, both for having left early and anticipating Debbie doing the "I told you so" thing. She remained silent, knowing I was upset. Not a word was spoken during the ride home, as I continued to fume, grasping the steering wheel so hard I thought it might crumble under my grip. As we pulled into the driveway, I turned on the radio to hear Bob Uecker announce, "The Brewers have just completed the greatest comeback in their history in the bottom of the ninth." Debbie hustled the kids into the house before I imploded, and I stayed in the car long enough to go back into the house in only a bad mood rather than a destructive one. And that's in the chapter that a friend of mine said I needed to name in honor of my dad, which is "Let's Beat the Traffic." And those are stories where people have left early and they shouldn't have, or people have stayed when they probably should have left and they've been rewarded. And in one or two cases, they never made it to that game in the first place, and how they have regrets. So, and as I mentioned to you, Joey, Dean and I kept in touch. And long story short, it turns out that we're related by marriage. And his son married my wife's cousin's kid's nephew or niece, whatever it is. I get this constantly confused, but you kind of get the idea. Anyway, so I have become aware of a couple of really wonderful songwriters who, among other great things that they do, they write great baseball songs. And I was aware that this man, Dan Byrne, was a great songwriter. I mean, the body of his work is actually astonishing. And baseball songs are just a part of that, but they are really great. And I wrote to Dan. I don't remember how I contacted him. I somehow got his email address. I wrote to him, and he responded immediately and said, "I'd love to give you a story for your book. It would, kind of give me something to do there." And this is his story. When I first started going to big league games, I was already 18. I grew up in Iowa, and all we had was single A ball. However, I quickly made up for it, going to about 40 games my first summer in Chicago. Most were at Wrigley Field. My normal routine was to roll out of bed around noon, stroll to the ballpark, grab a bleacher seat, drink beer in the sun, go home, pass out, and hit the open mic. The next day would be the same. This lasted most of the summer until I finally exhausted all my bar mitzvah money, and I had to start doing temporary office jobs. My fondest memory of those times happened one night, a couple of weeks before the season started. I was playing someplace a couple of blocks from Wrigley, under the L on Addison. I'd noticed there was scaffolding up as they were doing some last-minute work on the ballpark. After midnight, fortified by a few old styles, I walked up to the corner of Addison and Sheffield, climbed over, and I was in. I had Wrigley Field all to myself. I sat in the dugout and the press box, I ran the bases, and I made catches in the outfield against the ivy-covered walls. I've been to hundreds of games since then, but I'll never forget the night that Wrigley Field was mine. And that's Dan Byrne. And, Dan, I think you may be on here. Thank you for the story. And I look forward to, maybe doing a joint event with you at some point. So I think it's really clear to people, and I was remiss in not saying before, that you don't have to like baseball to like this book. As my friend Ronnie says, this is really a human interest book in a baseball jersey. And while some of the stories certainly are game related, play of game related, most of them aren't. And that's what I am particularly proud of about this book. I guess I should probably show it, right? This is the book. It's called Bases to Bleachers. And for anybody that's interested, I'll tell you later how you can get it. You told me, Joey, that you're going to kind of want to ask me about some of my favorite games. And I'm going to read this story, and I can talk more about that later if you want. Sure. I don't remember my first game. Quite honestly, I don't remember seeing Mickey Mantle play or Tom Seaver pitch. I mean, I know I did. I know I saw them multiple times. I lived in New York for all that time. I just don't remember it. But I sure remember the game I took my kids to, their first game. And that's in the introduction to this book. In August of 1992, I took my kids to their first baseball game, Giants versus Pirates. Transplanted New Yorker since 1975 and still a rabid Mets fan, I had previously visited Candlestick only when the Mets were in town. And for those of you who remember, in those days, that was twice a season. Rachel was 8 and David 4. We were with David's friend and his friend's dad. We sat in the upper deck, first base side, surrounded by a lot of empty seats. Many people remember their first game. I don't. Or taking their kids to see their first game. This was special. Rachel had tried her hand at t-ball, and it wasn't for her. She felt she wasn't as good as the boys. In some cases, that was true. In other cases, it wasn't. When I took Rachel to a movie, a dozen or so books always accompanied her, so she wouldn't waste a minute from the time her tush was on the seat cush until the movie started. So knowing how bored she'd be, she brought an entire library with her. By the fourth inning, David and Kenneth were done. They were still having a good time, but that involved running up and down the stairs to the top of Candlestick. I frequently looked at Rachel sitting next to me. Her eyes were transfixed on the field, as if she'd just seen, I don't know, the Mona Lisa, or the Beatles in concert right there almost 26 years early to the day, or the Leaning Tower of Pisa in the full moon. Take your pick of astonishing sights. She had it. The only things her eyes read during the full 9 innings were the program that I bought and the scoreboard. And then she started listening, really listening to Kruk and Kipe, Mike Krukow and Dwayne Kuiper, and she learned about the game. She immediately loved baseball as much as her dad did. I will never, ever forget that day. I only know who the Giants played because it's on the ticket stub. But I don't know if you could, there you go. I don't know who won. It's not important to me. The story is how a lifetime of family baseball burst forward in an unexpected way. 7 years later, she began working for the Giants in guest services, first handing out giveaways and now operating the press elevator. She knows seemingly everyone. David, of course, grew up to be a huge Giants fan as well, and almost every year I go to D.C. to take him to see his beloved team lose to the Nationals. In 2000, when the Mets faced the Giants in the playoffs, Rachel and David essentially called me out saying, "Okay, old man, which is it? Light side or the dark side?" Star Wars, of course. I still love my Mets, but the Giants are now number one. And I will always remember that day as the one that made it very, very easy to be a family man and a huge baseball fan. And, you know, that story just, well, it just means everything to me.
Love it.
There is a chapter called Doubles. And this chapter, like the chapter called Triples, this chapter is is comprised of 2 stories that have something to do with each other. They related in some way. They could be opposites. They could be telling the same story from a different perspective, but there's something that connects them. And this is from that chapter. And the one that I'm not going to read is a sadder one. And let's just try to keep it a little bit light here. The first time I had a beer with my dad was when we went to a Tigers game. I had come home on leave from Iraq, where I spent my 20th and 21st birthdays. Dad tried to get tickets for opening day, but he had to settle for the second game of the season. Without thinking, he ordered 2 beers, one for me and one for him, from the vendor walking up and down the aisles. Dad handed it to me, looked over and smiled and said, "This is the first beer we've had together." It's crazy. I know that people died in the war before they turned 21, before they ever got to share that kind of moment. In our country, you can fight and even die, but you can't have a legal drink. I could tell my dad was very proud of me. He was never an emotional guy. He never told me he loved me until a phone call I made to him when I was in Iraq. But I remember seeing him get emotional that day, with him realizing that I'd had a brush with death. His son was a war veteran before he could even legally buy a beer. Dad coached me through my entire childhood baseball career. We always bonded over baseball. To share that moment with him at a baseball game was a very proud day for him. We had hot dogs and peanuts and cheered on our Tigers all game and watched them win. It was a great day for both of us. I think for my dad, it was one of those moments that you always look forward to spending with your son. The fact that he almost had that chance taken away from him while I was in Iraq was devastating. Sharing that moment over baseball was so important because Dad watched me grow up on a baseball diamond. He taught me everything I know about baseball. And I won't give the guy's name because for whatever reason, he wanted to be anonymous in this. I don't, there are several stories that are anonymous, and in some cases I know why. I don't know why in this case, but it doesn't matter. I honor the request. All right. So this story is from one of the relatively few women umpires that have umpired at a high level. Unfortunately, Perry, who has become a good friend, was never able to crack a major league game, although she does and still does, I believe, umpire for the Mets during spring training. But this is Perry's story. Back around 1990, I was assigning umpires to camps down in Florida, and at the request of another umpire I knew, I hired a former American League umpire named Frank Umont to work the Mets fantasy camp with me. I hadn't met Frank, but I had a copy of an old baseball magazine with an article about, of all things, a home run call at Yankee Stadium that he had allegedly blown. So the first time I introduced myself, he was sitting in the locker room at Port St. Lucie with the other umpires, and I walked up to him. He looked up at me, totally flabbergasted. I guess Joe, the umpire who'd asked me to hire him, hadn't told him that Harry was a woman, much less a blonde. Right away, I could tell he was sort of put off. And I figured, what the hell? It can't get much worse. So I pulled out my copy of Baseball Magazine and I showed him the article, and I cheekily asked, "Do you remember that play? Did you really blow that call?" Human sat there in his underwear, by the way, thighs the size of ham hocks, his face ruddy with the hue of way too many alcoholic beverages. 70 years old if he was a day, his 20-year career in the American League a distant memory. He stared me up and down, looked as if he was about to swallow me whole and spit me back out in pieces. And then this enormous smile creased his face, and in a voice reminiscent of Eugene Pillet's, he growled, "Baby, I blew a lot of calls out there." It was hilarious. He autographed the article for me too. I probably still have that issue somewhere in my basement. I'll have to go rummaging one of these days. That's from the great, and I do mean it, the great Perry Barber. We have time for a couple more?
Of course.
Okay. I'm reluctant to make stories that are about my family, but the fact is, the ones that I'm reading to you are really good. And this one took place. Well, let me just read it. It's written by at the time my son's girlfriend and now his wife, and it was the second or maybe third time that we had ever met. And boy, this is really kind of getting to me here. This is probably a harbinger of what the Giants season is going to be like. It doesn't quite. So anyway, this is the second or third time that I met Lisa, and this is her story. It was the hottest baseball game I'd ever been to, and I'm from Texas, so that's saying something. Washington, D.C., 4th of July, 2011, 11 in the morning start time. It was me and the guys, my boyfriend, David, 4 of our friends, and David's father, Eric, who was in town visiting. Around the top of the second, we were all settled in, quickly warming beer in hand, and really starting to feel the heat. The sun was beating down on us, and we could feel ourselves starting to roast. I was sitting next to Eric, and I offered him some sunscreen. He squeezed the tube, and all of a sudden, a large blob arced toward the head of the woman in front of us. I think we both saw it happen in slow motion, wherever my hand is, but there was no stopping it. This woman is going to get sunscreen in her hair, or actually right on the small part in her hair. It made contact, stuck, and the woman didn't turn around. She sat watching the game, clapping, seemingly completely unaware. We sat there slack-jawed, me trying not to laugh hysterically, and Eric saying, "Oh my God, what did we do?" At that point, I was thinking, we? I had no part in this, but I had only known Eric for about 4 months, and I knew I should try to help. I told him we should probably tell this poor woman she had sunscreen that looked like bird poop on top of her head, and it was beginning to congeal. But Eric was too embarrassed. He said we should leave it and hope it evaporated. Now, I'm no chemist, but at this point, I'm sorry, I lost my place. I'm no chemist, but at this point, I was thinking there was no way this congealing liquid was going to turn to gas and magically let us pretend it hadn't happened. Eric would not be convinced. Instead, we spent the rest of the game sweating our butts off, rooting for the Giants, who were under some sort of curse at Nationals Ballpark, and tortuously watching sunscreen dry and adhere to this woman's scalp. But hey, we're going with maybe we helped protect her from cancer. And at least Eric and I still have that bonding experience to joke about to this day. And, you'd think that maybe she should have figured out what she was getting herself into, but, she married my son, and now Lynn and I are proud grandparents of a little girl.
Nice.
That's Alan. This is a great story. I mean, they're all great stories, honestly. This one is particularly special to me. Lynn and I were in New York, and Lynn wanted a cup of coffee, so we went to a little coffee shop. There was a woman sitting there, a young woman, and she had a Wrigley Field T-shirt on. So I went up talking to her, and I never got a story from her, but there was a young man sitting there as well who said, "I think I've got a story for you," and he did. On April 20th, 2007, my parents and I were in town to see our beloved Red Sox take on the Orioles at Camden Yards. Wandering around Baltimore's Inner Harbor with my mother on a clear, sunny spring day, ready for lunch, we passed a cheesecake factory. I not so subtly nudged Mom, saying, "Mom, look, Jason Veritek is eating here. We have to go." We chose the outside seating option for the weather, hoping to see the Red Sox captain. We shook hands with Orioles infielder Brian Roberts and Red Sox pitcher Kyle Snyder, and we were seated at the table next to Veritek and his friends. My 14-year-old self was trying to contain his excitement and maintain civility and dining etiquette. My intentions only waned when Mom abruptly blurted out, "Oh my God, Jesse, it's David Ortiz." I was wearing my Red Sox number 34 jersey, Ortiz's. As he passed by, he patted me on the shoulder and said, "Nice shirt, man." This was turning into quite an afternoon. Big Poppy was seated at the vacated table next to Veritek's. Imagine this uncontrollably excited 14-year-old Red Sox fan and his mother, simply seeking a place to eat lunch, now sitting at a table triangle featuring two of the most popular Red Sox players in recent memory. As we ordered and chatted about our nearly fantastical scenario, fans started imposing on these stars' space, asking for autographs and pictures. I just sat there and watched. Mid-meal, I nearly spat out my lunch, my Cheesecake Factory favorite, orange chicken, and I quietly exclaimed, "Mom, Manny Ramirez is here." He sat down with his Dominican pal, Ortiz. So the table trifecta had grown. Veritek and friends, Manny and David and friends, and 14-year-old Jesse and his mom. I could hardly eat, trying to prolong the experience by ordering dessert, asking for water, more time, anything. I watched every move the players made, even ignoring Mom, trying to eavesdrop on their conversations. When the waitress asked Big Poppy for his order, this is no lie, he turned to me and asked, "What did you have?" I immediately replied, "Orange chicken." And he said to the waitress, "I'll have 4. David Ortiz had just asked me what I was having, and he ordered my meal. This steak could not have gotten any better. It did, by the way. Mom was in total disbelief. We decided not to tell Dad of these goings-on until we left the restaurant. Veritek had gone. I'd shaken his hand and wished him good luck. It's imperative to know that Ortiz had just come out with an autobiography that Mom had bought me in hopes of getting it autographed in Baltimore. I approached his table and said, "I'm not going to ask you for an autograph or to take a picture, but I bought your book recently and I have tickets to the game tonight and was wondering if I brought it, would you sign it?" He said, "Yeah, buddy, bring it by." Thank you. At the last second, I said, "Hey, Manny," after entirely forgetting that another one of my all-time favorite players was next to me as well. We had to get to the ballpark when the gates opened at 5. With resounding success receiving autographs, I had my secrets and maneuvers for getting prime position. For 2 hours, I stood front row near the Red Sox dugout, where the players warmed up and stretched. Ortiz completed his pregame routine without even an acknowledgement. We watched the game from our ticketed seats, but I only lasted 8 innings. The game would end up in a 6-2 Red Sox win. The big hit, a bases-clearing double by, of course, none other than Big Poppy. In the 9th, I slipped past security and sat right next to the Red Sox dugout, book in hand, hoping to catch Ortiz on his way into the dugout. Once the final out was recorded and handshakes completed, we locked eyes, and he nodded his head at me. I was in. The butterflies in my stomach became full-fledged hummingbirds, but the Sox sideline reporter pulled him away for a post-game interview. The air in me was deflated. So close, I thought. But I didn't give up. He still had to make his way to the dugout. The interview concluded, and he acknowledged me again. I stuck my book over the rail for him to sign. I grabbed the Sharpie that belonged to the kid next to me. "I need this," I think I said. And there it was. He signed my book. As he handed it to me, I mentioned, "It was the orange chicken for that big hit tonight," alluding to the lunch we had shared that afternoon. He pulled the book back, smiled, wrote something else, and handed it back to me for good. I read what he had written. On the inside cover, his autograph, and underneath, a note that read, "Nice orange chicken." I looked up to say something, but he disappeared into the clubhouse. It was the only autograph he signed the entire night. It was the orange chicken. That's my favorite Red Sox baseball story. I've lived and breathed Red Sox baseball nonstop since I was 4. I've been to World Series games, seen walk-offs and a no-hitter, but this one tops my list. And this is from my friend Jesse. We've become friends now. I'm going to read one more real short one, okay?
Sure.
This is the point which I normally say. So if this is an in-person reading, you'd all give me a standing ovation and scream for encore. I say, it's okay. I know what I'm going to read. And this is it. So my daughter has now worked for the Giants since she was 14. And she operates the press elevator, which to some people may sound very boring, but the stories that she has, the people that she meets. I mean, the Giants announcers, Kruko and Kuiper, they love her. I mean, they love her. I've spoken with them. And when I mention her name, their eyes light up. I mean, they love her. And this is one of her stories. And this is, so at the end of the book, there were some chapters that I knew were going to be in the second book. And one of them was going to be called something like Ushers and Vendors and Ball Boys. Oh my, right? Take off on The Wizard of Oz. But I needed to have her story in this book and a few others. So I have a chapter that's essentially coming attractions. And this is from the chapter in this book, that the full chapter of which will be in the second book. I was 17 years old in my 3rd year as a guest services staff member for the San Francisco Giants. I was serving as the press elevator operator, which in a way sounds dull, but gave me a great opportunity to meet famous people. One day, one of those celebrities rode up and down several times, and finally, he looked at me and he said in a deep but friendly voice, "Hello, my name is Orlando," long pause, "Cepeda." I looked at him and I smiled sheepishly. And then with a big ear-to-ear smile on my face, I said, "I know who you are." He replied, "What's your name?" I looked at him for what seemed like hours, although probably only 10 seconds, and nothing came out of my mouth. I finally looked at my name tag and said, "Rachel." And from that point on, he just calls me baby. So that's a small little sample of stories from my book. I will just really briefly tell people how to get it. It's obviously available on Amazon. It's available at Barnes and Nobles. It's available, I'm sure if you go into your local bookstore, they can order it. If anybody wants to get it from me, it will be a few dollars more because I do charge a shipping. But people can contact me through Messenger. My name is Eric Gray. You can contact me through my website, which is basestobleachers.com. You can contact me through my Facebook page. By the way, my wife did all this stuff. I sound like I'm talking a big game, right? She took care of setting it up and she manages it. So thank you, Lynn. You can contact me through the Bases to Bleachers page and send me a message or leave a note. And I will be happy to, if anybody, I don't care how people get the book. I want them to read it. If you want my autograph and my personalized note, come to see me. And aside from that, Joey, thank you so much for giving me all this time.
Thank you for being here. It's been such a pleasure to hear you share these amazing stories. I usually read a book this size in about a week to 10 days. I finished it in 3 days because I couldn't put it down.
One really nice thing about this book is that you can read it at your leisure. You can read it like without putting it down. I mean, you don't have to read it in order. Obviously the chapters will have a theme, but in the long run, it doesn't really matter. You can open up, as my wife says, you can open up a book and she doesn't just say positive things about me just for the hell of it. I mean, if she says that, she means it. You can open it to almost any page and see a great story. You don't have to worry about character. Who was it? What did they do? You don't have to remember the plot. They're all short little stories. So, thank you.
We'll make sure after the show today, we're going to post actually in the group all the different ways that you guys can get a hold of this book. We'll share Eric's website, his Facebook page, any way to get a hold of this book. It's amazing. Eric, do you want to stick around and hear the Giants roster for the Utopian? This is the part 2 where if I made any glaring omissions that my guest tells me where I went wrong. So we're going to start before we actually get to the roster. We're going to look at some highlights of the schedule. The Giants are actually going to open their season on Friday the 26th on the road at Cincinnati. Their home opener will be April 2nd against the White Sox. Memorial Day at the Rockies. Independence Day at the Yankees. Labor Day at San Diego. And they're going to finish the season at the Diamondbacks. So a lot of the bigger, like, national games, if you will, are on the road. But opening the season at Cincinnati, home opener against the White Sox. The manager of the Giants is Bruce Bochy.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Right.
Yeah.
I got it. Okay. I got it.
So yeah, for the Utopian, Bruce Bochy, and if you guys watch some of these shows or any of these shows, they all have my phone number. So Bruce Bochy, as all the managers do, they call me the day of the show. This is the lineup he's going to go with. And again, I'll explain some of these picks here. I'm going to put it up on the screen here. Their big free agent get in January was landing Negro League Hall of Famer Pop Lloyd. Pop Lloyd is going to lead off and play shortstop on opening day. Batting second will be Buster Posey, the catcher. Batting third, Barry Bonds in left. Batting fourth, center fielder Willie Mays. Batting fifth, right fielder Mel Ott. Batting sixth, Willie McCovey. Batting seventh, third baseman Matt Williams. Batting eighth, second baseman Jeff Kent. And then for the second straight year, opening day starter for the Giants, Christy Mathewson. How deep is a lineup if you have a home run champion batting seventh and a former MVP batting eighth?
Am I muted? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, I thought it said unmuted. No, I mean, honestly, how can you argue with any of those choices? I'm glad that you chose Kent. Kent is someone who, he's a bit of a surly personality, but, if you look at what he did on the field, I mean, he was amazing. I mean, I find it rather astonishing that he has garnered such little Hall of Fame support. I don't know that he should be a lock, but, he gets like 20%. And I honestly don't understand because, one of the kind of unwritten criteria is that you had to dominate your position for a stretch of time. And, Kent, I think, set the all-time record for a number of seasons and consecutive seasons with over 100 RBIs. I think he bested Rogers Hornsby with that. And so I'm surprised that Kent has gotten such little support. So I'm glad that you've got him in there. And Willie Mays, that's a surprise in center field.
Yeah, we'll see what he can do. We'll test him out.
Right.
Let's look at the bench. So this is obviously a very talented team. We're going to try to get these guys some at-bats during the season here. Benji Molina, Will Clark, Robbie Thompson, Pablo Sandoval, Brandon Crawford, Mike Yastrzemski, Kevin Mitchell, and the gentleman you mentioned earlier, Orlando Cepeda.
Some great choices. I mean, I think Kevin Mitchell, I don't know if he's one of the all-time greats, but I will tell you something. He made the single. I mean, many people remember the catch he made, right, when he was running to the back and he shoved backwards. But I will tell you, when he was with the Mets, I saw him at Candlestick, and I don't remember throws or home runs or, I mean, I know I've seen some of Bond's milestone home runs. I honestly don't remember, except I know I was there because I know I was there, but I don't remember it. Mitchell was playing for the Mets, and somebody hit a ball. It was literally in the corner in left field. He picked up the ball, and he threw a perfect strike at home to nail the runner. It was the greatest throw I have ever seen. And my book has 3 people who gave me 3 different Roberto Clemente throws. I mean, I know that guy had a cannon. And I'm not saying that Mitchell was as good as Clemente, but that throw was the greatest throw that I've ever seen.
Let's take a look at the pitching. The pitching here is incredible. And just, if you're a first-time viewer, so the way these rosters are built, it's about a third greats, a third favorites over time, and then I tried to get a good mix of like current players. So let's take a look at the pitching here. As I mentioned earlier, Christy Mathewson getting the start on opening day against the Reds. Madison Bumgarner in the 2-hole. One of my favorite pitchers in the last 15 years or so, Matt Cain. And then San Francisco is going to start a series with Cleveland after the Red series. They're going to face Carl Hubble, Juan Marichal, and then Mathewson again. This Giants team also has Tim Lincecum and one of my favorite baseball cards from when I was a kid, John Montefusco, if I'm saying that right. And then let's look at the bullpen here. We've got Rod Beck, Brian Wilson, Gary Lavelle, Greg Minton, Santiago Casilla, Sergio Romo, and Randy Moffett. Again, a lot of these guys, especially in the bullpen, were guys I remember from baseball cards. Eric, what can you tell me about some of these pitchers on this Giants roster?
Well, we love Romo, and Wilson didn't last long, but boy, when he was on, he was really on for the what? Rob Nen. Lynn is calling in for Rob Nen. Rod Beck is loved here. Lavelle and Minton, and Moffett, they were kind of in the 70s. I remember them all, but I wasn't really following the Giants that closely. I'd have to sit and think if there's any notable omissions. I have to tell you that I am so thrilled with your number 3 choice in the starting rotation. Matt Cain is our guy.
I love Matt Cain.
I will never have another favorite baseball player. I mean, I'm like kind of too old for that. The players I like. I mean, I love Buster Posey. I love Mike Yastrzemski. I think it's a great story. Matt Cain is going to be the last favorite player I ever have. He is our guy. And, when my son was buying a Lincecum jersey, because, Lincecum was the sexy choice, right? I mean, he was amazing he looked at me and he said, I know I should be getting a Cain jersey. And there's a story, if you don't mind I'm kind of doing the color work, right? You were the play-by-play and I'm doing the color.
Sure.
There's a story in the second book. And remember I told you before that the core chapter for me was what baseball means to me? That's going to be a chapter in the second book. I'm going to call it something different. I think I'm going to call it my player, my team, my guy, or my player, my team. Yeah, my game, whatever it is. And it was how when Cain pitched his perfect game, how that connected my family. Because Lynn and I were watching in the living room. Rachel was watching or kind of paying attention to it in the press elevator. And David was in Washington, D.C. when it was 1:00 at night and he knew he should have gone to bed and he couldn't not watch the end of this game. And the texts between the 4 of us were flying. And, that was a special night for us. And there are actually a couple of stories in the book about that, all different perspectives of that game. I don't want to make the book such a Giants, centered thing. They're great stories, and I always say that it doesn't matter where you sang the national anthem. Just because it happened at AT&T, it doesn't mean it couldn't have been in Houston or Pittsburgh. We're just so happy about Cain, and Cain Cain's a pitcher that his career stats do not mirror how good he was. I mean, there's an expression that's formed because of him, and it's to be caned, to get caned. Because the guy, and I remember this from watching the Mets, and I think that Ron Darling was the victim of the same thing, who never got run support. But Cain, and we went to the last game that Cain pitched. It was the last game of the season, and we didn't have tickets for that day, but we wanted to go because this was our guy. And he pitched 5 innings. Reputedly, the last one, he was on fumes, and it was perfect. He lost 1-0. He got no support. It's the way, sadly, he should be remembered. And I was a guy who never, ever complained about anything. He never said, it was always, if he gave up 1 run, it was his fault. And that's why we love him so much.
I've watched that game now 5 or 6 times, because as soon as MLB made it available on DVD, I bought it and I watch it probably every year. I pull it out.
Oh, I mean, again, I don't remember a lot of stuff, but you remember the Gregor Blanco catch, and then you remember the last play, right, which is a tricky hop. Joaquin Arias, you remember he had to step back, so his momentum was going away from the throw. Oh boy, I mean, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about that. It was a great game.
So Eric, we have a number of comments and questions that we'll get to here. Dean, our friend Dean says, I have so enjoyed your book, Eric. And
you're a good, loyal friend, Dean, I got to tell you.
Tim says, this is such a great idea of a book. I know what my next read is going to be.
Thank you, Tim. I've told you how you can get the book, and it doesn't matter to me how you get it. I mean, get it and enjoy it. And to you, as well as to everybody else, I forgot to say, please send me your stories. My email is, if you get the book, assuming you get the book, from Amazon or something, Tim, my email is in that book. Now, the second book is going to the publisher, but I'm pretty sure there'll be a third. So please send me your stories.
Tim also says, come on, Ghostbusters 2 wasn't that bad.
Well, you're talking about the Ghostbusters with the women from a couple of years ago. That was pretty good. I didn't like the second Ghostbusters.
Dean also says, perfect book to have around during the pandemic. It's more about human beings, each story with some connections to baseball, not necessarily MLB. Funny stories, sweet stories, tender stories, interesting stories, incredible stories, and more. It's a book that you can binge read or pick it up now and then to read a few stories to set a mood. I just want to say that there was one story in there that made me cry, and I think her name was Jerry. She had, I guess her son wanted to see a team in the World Series. They pulled some money out of savings. They went to a scalper, and she obviously didn't have enough to buy the tickets. But the scalper wanted the kid to go, so she gave him, I forget what the amount was, $300, $400.
I don't remember what it was. Yeah.
Yeah. So she gave him the money. She got the tickets, and then he left. But he gave her the phone number, and then everyone that was looking at the tickets were like, "These are phony tickets. You just bought counterfeit tickets." So she called the guy and said, how do you feel selling me these tickets? I can't believe that you would do this to a kid." And he said, "I'll come right back. I'll give you the money back. Those are legit tickets." And then they came back, talked it out. She finally gave him the money back, took the chance. The tickets ended up being real. They were, I forget what the circumstance was. They were like Willie Mays tickets, or
they were Willie Mays' seats. That's right.
It was just at the end of it, I started to tear up. Person I take care of was like, "Why are you crying?" And I'm like, "Oh, this damn baseball story is making me cry." Let's see. So someone says Clay's older brother. I think that's a reference to my last name.
Right.
Yeah, no relation, but I get that all the time. At least, someone said, "Oh, Clay's younger brother." I'm like, no, I'm way older than Clay Buchholz. Tim says that's an amazing Ernie Banks story, indeed. I get, maybe we made Tim cry. It says it's getting dusty in here. Maybe we made Tim emotional. Tim also says, "Holy cow! I know what I'm getting my baseball-loving mom for her birthday."
Tim, the book will, when you go to a movie theater, you always have, and they've seen the coming attractions. It's, what will it be tomorrow? What will fate happen? These ridiculous. If I had a tagline for this book, it's that stories that will make you laugh, cry, and remember. And the fact is, there are stories that I've read in that book that I've read out loud at 15 readings, and I get goosebumps all the time. For example, the story, and I'm not going to give you any details, but the story about the guy, it's a guy I met at a game, and it's about his grandpa, who was a fighter pilot in the war, and his connection with baseball. It's a great story. I mean, it's just a great story. I mean, one of the stories that I read, and I guess this wouldn't have the same impact for anybody else, but when I read my daughter-in-law's story about the sunscreen, I mentioned that was in a chapter called Triples. And the stories in this case, the connection was in environmental factors, right? So there's one of the other stories in that triple was from somebody lives in Montreal or Toronto, and it's how they played a game in September, and it got so cold that they started playing Christmas carols. I mean, it was starting to snow. But the third story was the reason that this is kind of sad for me, and it gives me tears, what wouldn't give anybody else, is it's a story that a friend of mine would have told had he lived to tell it. And it's about a game that he and I and my wife, Lynn, and two other friends went to in Candlestick Park when it was so cold that he went to get hot chocolate, and he missed 4 innings of the game because of it. And that's kind of the funny part. But it's just a really, it's a sweet story. And,
I love it. I love it. Tim's final comment we'll show here is Tim is confirming the Iraq veteran and beer story got to him.
Me too. Wait till you read the one that's paired with. It's a not a happy story.
Yeah. Eric, I can't thank you enough for being here tonight. This is one of the coolest things I've ever done, having you read stories from your book. I can't wait for the second one. I have one more question to ask you, though, if you have just a couple minutes. You've told me, and you've shared this within a group that you do, the Obscure Songs group, that your number one love is music. What's the last thing you listen to in your home? What albums? Could be albums, playlists, but tell me about some of the music you're listening to lately.
I mean, I hate to sound like an old guy, but I have an iPod, believe it or not. And so most of the time I listen on shuffle. If you ask me go-to stuff, it's the Beatles. I mean, I think, Abbey Road is the most phenomenal album ever made. And there's no small piece of music that I like better than that guitar solo on the backside of Abbey Road on the second side, where Paul, George, and John trade off. I'm a huge Jackson Browne fan. I'm a lyrics guy. I like current stuff. I mean, I hate to say that, when I talk about Counting Crows, they're really not new, but they're newer than the Beatles and Jackson Browne, although Jackson Browne still makes good music. I like a really wide range of stuff, mainly lyrical things. And Joey, I should tell you that after I put the second baseball book to bed, I'm going to be starting a concert stories book. So if anybody has a story they want to share to me, and it's not just about concerts, it's about anything musical. It could be, why a line of a song means so much to you. Kind of the equivalent of what baseball means to me, right? My email address for anybody who wants to know it, it's long, but it's simple. It's Eric, ERIC, .baseballstories, plural, one word, eric.baseballstories@gmail. Concert book is going to be great. I mean, for me, it was the concert for Bangladesh. That was George Harrison's benefit concert that Ravi Shankar asked him to do. And to me, it's the greatest concert of all time and the greatest array of talent on one. It was amazing.
I can't wait. I can't wait to hear about that as well. Eric, once again, I feel like we've been so honored to have you tonight. I can't wait to have you on the show in the future again. Tonight, I'll get the information out on where people can get the book. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock is our last, I guess, scheduled show. Jerry Grillo is going to be here to talk about the Braves, who won the Utopian Baseball Universe last year. We do have a makeup show, if you will. The Monday one that got canceled, that's going to be Saturday at noon with Nate Miller and hopefully Billy Ball. And then I'm doing a Q&A at 2 o'clock on Saturday. So hopefully we'll see you all again tomorrow at 7. Again, for my guest, Eric C. Gray, I'm Joey Buchholz. You guys have a great night, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you, Joey.
Thank you, Eric.
It was an honor for me, actually.
So much fun. Thank you.